Hello, I'm the Doctor.
Hey Who fans, this is the Big Blue Box Podcast, episode 8, coming at you from somewhere in space and time. Hope you guys have had a good couple of weeks. It's good to be back recording the podcast, giving you guys the news roundup on everything Who. So it's going to be a cool news roundup this week. Got a very interesting story to go through. Then we've got the normal Tardis Talk, where I'm going to be talking about kind of a global Doctor Who kind of feel. And then in a retrospective, it's going to be a bit more of a new era episode as well. So without further ado, let's crack on with the news. The news, wow. Before we come on to the big story, we have got a couple of very cool things to go through. First up, as you may know, I mentioned on the last podcast and probably the one before that Titan Comics are going to be bringing out their new run of Doctor Who comics, starting with the 10th Doctor. And both the 10th and the 11th Doctor comics will be available very soon, with the first one coming out on the 26th of July. And to kind of beef up the market a little bit, get the hype going, Titan Comics have declared the 26th of July as Doctor Who Comics Day, which is quite cool, and there's going to be various events and signings and whatnot going on pretty much everywhere. If you're in the UK like me and you're interested in going to checking out some of these events, there's a couple going on. The first one is at Forbidden Planet in Bristol, which is on the 26th of July. You'll be able to go and get your comics signed by one of the writers and the artists, and that will be between 3 p.m. and 4 p.m. in Bristol. And then a little bit later on the 2nd of August in the at the London Megastore, same time, 3 p.m. to 4 p.m, the same deal. You'll be able to go down, get your comics, and then go and get them signed, which is very cool. Always like getting my stuff signed if possible. Adds a little bit more, does it add a bit more value to it, I guess? Not sure, but it's still cool nonetheless. So Titan Comic Doctor Who Comics Day, 26th of July. I'm sure there's other stuff going on if you have a Google around and see what's going on. But in the UK, those were the two sort of main events that I could find which link directly to the comics. Next up, another new trailer for Series 8. Now, this is kind of an interesting one, this trailer, because it kind of struck two chords for me. The first one is it's set within the TARDIS again, which I found kind of strange because everything that we've seen pretty much so far from Series 8, if not including all of the fan photos from on set and all that kind of stuff, but official photos or anything that's been put out by the BBC, it always seems to be in the TARDIS at the moment. They're very, very contained and tight-lipped about anything else to do with it. So it's another inside the TARDIS little shot, and it's quite cool. It's got like this, I don't know how well it's done in my opinion, really. It looks okay, I guess, for a trailer. It's kind of got this X-ray thing going on where we see inside the Doctor's body and his two hearts and stuff, which kind of ties in with the interesting voiceover, which is my second point, which is clearly, and I hope I'm not getting this completely wrong, otherwise I'm going to look very daft, is clearly Davros. And the audio is a bit kind of intertwined with, I think, from what I can hear anyway, it's very much intertwined with some classic Dalek tones in there. But yeah, new trailer, check it out.
I see into your soul, Doctor. I see beauty, divinity, hatred.
Yeah, new trailer. It's only short, like 20 seconds, but it does give another insight into what we can expect from Series 8, which is clearly the Daleks, or at least Davros. I'm assuming that we're not going to go an entire series of Doctor Who without the Daleks being brought into it from somewhere. in some story plot or whatever. But Davros is cool. I really like Davros. All of the the few classic episodes that I've seen which featured Davros are normally pretty good. And yes, even Remembrance of the Daleks with Davros was pretty good. So like Davros, looking forward to seeing him. Looking forward to seeing him and Capaldi trade blows, however that might be. Not sure how well that'll go down with Capaldi beating up on a disabled guy, but he's a doctor, does what he likes. Cool. Third news story. This is a biggie. Anyone that's into Doctor Who would have heard about this. I think it started... I'm recording this podcast on Wednesday the 9th of July, and I think this kicked off on Sunday night or Monday. And someone has been very, very naughty at BBC America or BBC Worldwide, whichever it is. Somehow the complete script for the first 5 episodes of Series 8 are now out there on the net, freely available. Well, mostly freely available if you know where to look. Scripts have leaked. Big boo-boo by somebody. And this throws up this always, when anything like this happens, it always throws up a really interesting topic, which is, should we engage in spoilers as fans? And I remember when, I think it was BBC America, dispatched all of their Doctor Who DVDs and Blu-rays a few weeks early, and Stephen Moffat went publicly to say, apologise for the goof and everything, but can I just plead to the fans to not spoil anything? And to their credit, all of those our fellow Who fans over in the US, you guys did in fact keep stum and tight-lipped about it, which is very cool. So I'm wondering if the same thing is going to happen. It's been a few days now since the leak, and I personally haven't seen too much leakage over the net. It's been fairly contained from what I've seen. I have had a couple of people offer to send me a link to see these scripts, and I can wholeheartedly say, hand on heart, I have declined. And that's not because I'm not interested. I am mega super interested, and it took a lot of willpower for me to type back, no thank you, you're okay. But I know I do follow obviously a lot of people on Twitter, a lot of Doctor Who fans on Twitter and Facebook, and I know of a lot of Who fans that have indulged and have gone in there, just dived into the spoiler pool head first, and they don't seem to be bothered about it. But all I've seen really is like little snippets. Like a couple of people have put like, oh, I'm not looking forward to the climax in episode 4. This doesn't sound or read very good, which is okay. I can deal with that because chances are when we get round to the series starting next month, yay, we can say, how cool is that, by the way? We can now say that Doctor Who is coming back next month. We're now in July. It's going to kick off at the end of August, but we can now officially say, yay, next month. Anyway, so when it rolls around to the end of August and I'm really focused on watching the episodes, I'm sure I'm not going to remember too much of these little tempting nuggets of spoilers. And so it's been very cool so far. Like I said, there hasn't been any one or group of Doctor Who fans that have just gone crazy and spoiled everything over the net, which is very cool. If you are one of those Doctor Who fans that have checked out the scripts and you're not really afraid of spoilers, please let me know what you think about it so far without obviously spoiling it for me. That's kind of a key factor in this, is that I don't want to be spoiled. Thank you. Which is kind of weird, kind of strange, because as somebody that dishes out news to you guys and talks about Doctor Who and wants to be in the know about all this kind of stuff, at the same time I'm also a fan, obviously. So, and because Doctor Who Series 8 is going to be very very different, I feel, to what we've seen before, and it's breaking new ground potentially, I really don't want to go into it knowing what's going to happen. I want to be as a true fan and experience it fresh and stuff. So yeah, very big thumbs up to all of you guys who have seen it and not spoilt it. That's very cool. But yeah, do let me know what your thoughts are on it, but keep them spoiler free. So just jump on Twitter, tweet me. It's at BigBlueBoxPcast. And yeah, just let me know what your thoughts are. That'd be cool. So that is the news. Now we're going to kick off the Tardis Talk. Tardis Talk this episode. I'm going to keep this kind of, I don't know how to say this really. I'm going to try and keep this without sounding like a rant. And without sounding unappreciative, I guess. And what I want to talk about is kind of a generic, big top line subject, but is Doctor Who getting too big? There you go. It's been on my mind for a couple of weeks now. And while I was researching to do this podcast and I was looking about for like clips of audio clips for stuff that I'm going to be talking about later, you kind of fall into that YouTube trap sometimes. And I'm guessing that pretty much everyone has done this, where you go onto YouTube, you start searching for a video, and then in the recommendations list, you jump onto another video, and then another, and before you know it, 2, possibly 3 hours, sometimes more, of your life has been wasted just falling into the YouTube trap. And I did that earlier today while I was putting clips together for this podcast. And I stumbled onto a few clips where it was fans at conventions saying what they feel is great about Doctor Who, why they feel it's so popular and why it works so well. And that got me thinking, of all the stuff that's been going on recently, Doctor Who really has gone global. I'm not saying that like, oh my God, I've just realised. I'm aware that it's been very big globally for a long time, but I think certainly for the last couple of series that Matt Smith was in the role, it really did jump up a whole nother notch, I feel anyway, and it really did go, not crazy, but the whole world, especially America and Australia and stuff, they absolutely love the show, which is not a bad thing at all. Let me just caveat this whole segment by saying that I don't think Doctor Who could be too big in terms of more viewers. I think the more people that watch Doctor Who and the more people that appreciate it and show their love for it is never a bad thing. So, like I said at the beginning, I don't want to sound unappreciative or like this is a bad thing. It really isn't. But the overall question is Doctor Who getting too big? It's more like, is it starting to feel like the show is slipping away from us a little bit? Because I've heard previous podcasts and previous articles and stuff where overseas Doctor Who fans, especially you guys over in the US and stuff, how much you've liked in recent years how easily accessible Doctor Who is for you guys now, and even to the point where you're getting Blu-ray releases before we do, if at all. If we think about the docudrama from the 50th, An Adventure in Space and Time, there's no plans for us to get that on Blu-ray at the moment, whereas you guys in the US have got that. So it's kind of this thing where Doctor Who has always been quintessentially British. It's like an institution for us here in the UK. It's one of those shows where even back during the 70s and 80s, and certainly since it came back in 2005, it's all been done here in Wales, in the UK. So all of the writing, the production, most of I know they go away, overseas now and then to do a couple of on-location stuff, but primarily it's all done in Cardiff in Wales. So the writing team is here, the production team, and they even a lot of the supporting cast is also from around this area. So it's very, very, and I hate talking like this because it should be globally celebrated and it should be shared amongst all fans across the world. But there is something very British about it, and you can't, and I say that with love because you can't escape that. It's very, very British to a large extent. And when you see things like the Blu-rays being released globally without being here, you've got global simulcasts, you've now got premieres in cinemas, you've got international press tours. Peter Capaldi, Jenna Coleman have gone on like a worldwide tour to promote the show, which seems like for a show that is now as big as Doctor Who and as successfully large and huge as Doctor Who, seems like the BBC are wasting a tiny bit of money there by sending everybody around the world to promote it where it doesn't. Does it need it? I'm not sure. That's another question. Then you've got like the live reveal show when they announced Peter Capaldi as the Doctor. And now you've got Doctor Who stuff being leaked. And this is all outside of the UK and Cardiff and stuff. So, I do understand why the show is so popular overseas. A lot of fans deserve to enjoy it and stuff. And, it's very, very popular. Very, very popular.
Because Doctor Who, it's huge in America now.
It's growing, yes, quite excitingly. There was this thing with the iTunes, which has been really positive, that it's the most downloaded show in America. It beat like Glee and Mad Men and...
Really?
It was number one.
Really?
Yeah.
But there isn't...
You're like, whoa!
I think it's just the concept that, the universe can be explored, at any time, at any place, just to having that freedom to go ahead and explore and be anything, anywhere. I think the fact that the show can reinvent itself is what has made it popular, because it can change to suit every new generation that comes to discover it. The actors can change, the whole format can change, the style can change.
That's the best explanation I've heard in all these years.
I think that's the secret to its longevity, is the fact that it can adapt to pretty much any new generation that wants to take it over and make it their own thing.
I'm with Barbara and Adrian, who've been up since very early this morning to come and watch this 50th anniversary episode. Barbara, what did you think?
It was absolutely incredible. It way exceeded my expectations. I'm so glad I got up early and didn't miss this.
What about you, Adrian?
I loved it. It was absolutely fantastic. 10 out of 10. Yeah, really good.
So a lot of guys there from mainly the US and Australia, really, really into it. And you can tell, how far and how much of a reach the show has got, especially over the last 3 or 4 years, I would say. It's really gone crazy. And when I was at the Doctor Who proms last year for the 50th anniversary, it was crazy. It was absolutely nuts, because before the proms even kicked off, we had the debacle with the ticket booking system where, the proms itself is a very, very popular classical, series of concerts every year. And just by themselves, if you don't include the Doctor Who part of it, it's very, very popular, really good ticket sales. The ticking booking system can be very difficult and testing anyway. And then when you throw Doctor Who on there, it just broke everything. There were people, when I was queuing up to book tickets on that, I took the morning off work to do it because I knew it'd be busy, but bloody hell, I was waiting online for approximately 2.5 hours. And I think I joined the queue at number 5,300 and something, I remember. And it felt like forever watching that number count down until I finally was able to book a couple of tickets. And I remember when I got my 2 tickets, literally within minutes, there was a notice that went out from the Royal Albert Hall to say that it was now sold out. So it was crazy. And that's down to Doctor Who. That is how big the show has become, where it just immediately just takes over an event like the proms and just makes it its own, really. So, and it all this kind of, when I was looking at these videos and stuff, it also kind of linked back to this script leak, which happened which I believe, where BBC Worldwide was somehow, I don't know if it was sent it to somebody at an incorrect department or CC'd somebody in, I'm not sure, but they were sending it down to one of the BBC offices in Miami so that they could do some translation, because it's going to go out in a few more languages and stuff. But I'm just thinking to myself, has it become that big where it's kind of scary to think that it would be vulnerable outside of keeping it contained within Cardiff and the UK? Because when Doctor Who first came back in 2005, yes, there was leaks, yes, there was the odd fluff here and there, but not to the extent of this. This is quite a big one, quite a biggie, because it's a brand new series. It's very, very much anticipated and very, very big news right now. But when it came back in 2005 and everything was based here in Cardiff, there was none of this BBC America involvement, not this heavily anyway. Does it, has Doctor Who become that big that things like this happen? And it's an interesting one, because I was speaking to my wife about this recently, because she's now, I wouldn't say she's a full-on Doctor Who fan, but she very, very much is. I wouldn't say she's on her way, but she appreciates the show, and she likes it a lot more than what she did before I knew her. And she's, we often, don't talk about the show directly, but we talk about stuff like the proms and that kind of thing. And she's always really, really surprised when she sees things like after the proms, I think there was a concert in Sydney, Australia, which was part of a tour, I think, about the music of Doctor Who, and she was like, wow, it's going to Australia. And then when she sees things like panels at Comic-Con in San Diego, where you've got I think it was a few years ago, it was like David Tennant, Russell T Davies, John Barrowman, and some other people, Julie Gardner, at Comic-Con in San Diego. She's like, wow, that's just like a little British TV show. What are they doing at Comic-Con? So when I hear opinions like that and I hear thoughts like that, I think, wow, is this something that's elevated beyond our fandom within the UK? Is it something that is, now too big for us to grasp because there's so much going on? And I do feel I just want to close this segment off now and say, I do feel in a very small way that the show is kind of slipping away and becoming out of our reach in terms of being a British, a typical, core British program, because there is so much happening with it globally and stuff. And, will the show suffer as a result of that? Will the expectation become so high that they feel that they have to raise the bar in certain aspects and bring it away from what makes it, because I think some of the appeal, because when I've spoken to Doctor Who fans who do live in America and a couple of friends that I know in Australia, one of the things that they do actually like about the show is its Britishness. That's part of the appeal. And, as the production team and the writers and stuff, I really hope, Stephen Moffat and whoever, takes his job as the showrunner eventually, I really hope that they keep the show close to their chest in terms of keeping it very British and stuff like that, because Doctor Who could never be too big in terms of fan appreciation. It could never be too big in terms of global audience or anything like that. The show is too good to deny people that. However, is it too big from a production point of view, where will it start losing its Britishness and stuff like that? So really interested to hear your thoughts on this one. Please jump on Facebook if you want to write a bit more than 140 characters, facebook.com/Big Blue Box Podcast. I would really be interested to hear what you think about how Doctor Who has grown in the past however many years since Matt Smith took over, or David Tennant, whatever. And do you feel that it's becoming, a global phenomenon which is taking away its kind of, its quote unquote small British show? Really interested to hear your thoughts on that. And that will wrap up Tardis Talk. Hey, retrospective time. So on this one, on the last podcast, I did say that I wanted to take a step back from doing all of the classic Doctor Who stories and stuff, which I'm not stopping that completely. That is still going to go ahead, but I thought that I would just change it up a bit for the next few podcasts and talk about some more of the current Doctor Who, because I feel that they are relevant. And this one, this retrospective is going to be The End of Time, Part 1 and 2, David Tennant, which always, for me, it's one of those stories that always divides opinion amongst fans. And to be honest with you, I hadn't really thought about this one up until a few days ago. And I was listening to another Doctor Who podcast, which is the Doctor Who podcast, funnily enough. And they did they're going through a series talking about each regeneration story. And it happened to be David Tennant's The End of Time on this one. And I wanted to talk about this on this podcast because I felt like it was very, 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 very negative on that particular podcast. And don't get me wrong, I completely understand their reasons for saying, why they thought it wasn't the greatest Doctor Who story, and especially the regeneration part of it. And I'll be honest, it's not one of the best David Tennant stories. Certainly, if you look at the three series that he did plus the specials, out of all of those, there are certainly much, much better stories that he was part of. However, The End of Time, it's kind of a strange one.
Now, sorry. There you are. So, where were we? I was summoned, wasn't I? An ood in the snow, calling to me. Well, I didn't exactly come straight here. Had a bit of fun, travelled about, did this and that, got into trouble, you know me. It was brilliant. I saw the phosphorus carousel of the great Magellan Gestatt. Saved a planet from the red carnivorous maw. Named a galaxy Allison. Got married. That was a mistake. Good Queen Bess. And let me tell you, her nickname is no longer... Anyway. What do you want?
You should not have delayed.
Last time I was here, you said my song would be ending soon. And I'm in no hurry for that.
You will come with me.
Hold on. Better lock the TARDIS. See? Like a car. I locked it like a car. Like, it's funny. No? A little bit. Blimey, I'm trying to make an ood laugh.
Blimey, trying to make an ood laugh. So when I saw the opening to that, for the first time anyway, I thought, this is going to set the tone for the series, for this story, sorry. And yes, we knew that it was David Tennant's last trip as the Doctor. However, it turned out to be really, really, I think you'll all agree, The End of Time, Part 1 and 2, is a very emotional story. And the reason why I say it's a strange one is because it does divide a lot of people. I know a lot of Who fans that absolutely detest this story. They hate everything about it. And then I also know a lot of Doctor Who fans that quite like it, that don't mind it, and they feel it's a fitting send-off for David Tennant and so on. I just want to give you my thoughts on this because, when I was listening to this other podcast, in a nutshell, they didn't really have a single good word to say about any of this story, whether it be David Tennant as the Doctor, his regeneration, anything like that. There wasn't one good word to say about it. And I jumped on Twitter and tweeted them and said, just listen to your podcast, The End of Time. Is it really that bad? And I haven't had a reply yet. I'm not sure if I will or not. But, is it that bad? Is it that bad of a Doctor Who story in general? Let's not talk about David Tennant and his exit and his regeneration for a moment, but just as a story, is it that bad? I don't think it's that bad. I really don't. I watched it again after I listened to this podcast a few days ago. I did watch it again, both parts. And it's one of those stories where it does get better on multiple viewings. Put it that way. Because when the very first time you watch it, it's not the most straightforward of stories. It can get a little bit confusing at times because there are some things in there that you don't really see often in Doctor Who. Like, because Doctor Who is always, for me anyway, it's best when it's grounded in semi-serious science fiction. But when they start to introduce magical type, not really magic, but almost magical type stuff in stories, it does get a little bit far out, if you know what I mean. And I was thinking about this when I was watching it, and it does get better on repeat viewings. I said multiple viewings, I should have said repeat. Because this must have been the fourth time that I've seen it now. Third or fourth time. And it does get better with repeat viewings. And one of the things that I quite like about this, because like I said, I'm not just going to beat the whole thing up and say it's terrible and stuff like that, because personally I honestly don't feel that it is that bad. I think there are personally, I think there are a lot worse. I think there are a lot worse Doctor Who stories out there. And the End of Time, it's quite bold as well. It's quite, it's quite ambitious in its story. There's quite a lot going on. You've got storylines with the Master, the Doctor, Donna. You've also got the Time Lords, potentially coming back. So there's quite a lot going on. But one of the things that, let me just tell you what I don't really like about it first. That's easy to get those bits out of the way. One of the things that I don't particularly like is, and they did bring this up in the Doctor Who podcast when they were talking about it, is the idea that the Doctor is going to die. Because for me, the Doctor is very much about, the Doctor doesn't die. It's that's the whole point of regeneration. It's not, you're not bringing somebody back from the dead. They're regenerating into somebody else. And this script and this story does, it plays very much on that concept that the Doctor feels like he's going to die. And, there is a scene where the Doctor is sitting down with Wilf in a cafe, and it's very, quite a deep conversation and stuff. And the Doctor is saying, I feel like, this, my time's up. And, I'm not sure what the word to describe him is. He's very quite militant about it, where he's like, my time's almost up, and then I'm going to die, and then some other guy's going to be taking my place. He's very much he's very much playing the the sympathy card in this section.
Even if I change, it feels like dying. Everything I am dies. Some new man goes sauntering away. And I'm dead.
Yeah. So not the most uplifting, not the most cheerful, uplifting moments. And to be fair, both parts of the End of Time are very, like I said at the beginning, they're really emotional, and it's quite. It does pull at the old heartstrings at various moments throughout the entire story. So I'm not really a fan of this concept that the Doctor dies. It's not about death. Really isn't about him as an individual person dying, and then some concepts of necromancy, like bringing back the dead. So somebody else can take it. It really doesn't feel right that Doctor Who should be saying it that way and should be portraying it as death, because it really, really isn't, in my opinion anyway. So I'm not really a fan of that whole kind of, I'm going to die, and somebody else is going to take my place. Wasn't really a fan of that. I wasn't really a fan of the Master in this. A lot of people feel that it's just completely bonkers and wacky that the Master would take over every person on the entire planet. I don't really have too much of a problem with that story, because it is that nuts, and the way that the Master is played in this particular story, and the way that he is at this point, is completely bonkers and nuts. So it fits with his his master plan to make the master race, funnily enough. So it does fit with that, with his mental kind of state at that time. It's a completely over-the-top, bonkers plan. But if you think about it, that's just how the master is, completely bonkers and over-the-top. The problem, not a problem, but the thing that I wasn't really a fan of was the way that John Sims played the master in this episode. It was a bit too over the top in a lot of places, and a bit kind of a bit full on all of the time. I much prefer the calmer, more sinister feel to the master, possibly from the classic years. I feel that when he's completely over the top and bonkers all the time, by the end of the story, you're just kind of mentally exhausted by watching him all the time being that way. And you kind of you want nothing more than the Doctor just to give him a backhander and just shut him up for a while. But it doesn't really happen. He's still banging on right up until, near the end of the story. He's still going on and on and on. So I wasn't really... I'm not... John Sims, he's a really good actor, and I don't really mind how he's played the Master in the previous times that he's been in the show. But this one, I think he just took it up a notch, and he just went mental for the whole time. So that was a bit draining watching that. Although, like I said, not terrible, just a bit over the top. And thirdly, the other problem I have is it's kind of... It kind of echoes, I guess, the Doctor Who podcast that I listened to, where those guys were saying that by the end of it, they just wanted David Tennant to go. It was like, you're dragging this out for so long, and the regeneration is being built up and up and up, and, we just want you to go. We know you're going, just get on with it. And as much as I love David Tennant as the Doctor, I do echo those thoughts, I must admit, because... up until that point, most, if not all, regeneration scenes had been very short and sweet. There was none of this exploding TARDIS. There was none of this, self-indulgent, I need to go off and get my reward, as he puts it, and all that kind of stuff. It was just, a very, very short scene at the end of an episode, really. If I think back to all of the classic years, and even the Chris Eccleston regeneration was very much at the end of an episode, 5 or 6 minutes, and that was it. He was regenerated. So it was the first time that we'd seen a very drawn out and long process for the Doctor leading up to his regeneration. And when I very first watched this, I was an emotional wreck. I'm going to be totally honest with you now, because I very much consider David Tennant to be, in the new era, to be my Doctor, if you like. And I still need to come on to why that is in a future podcast. But, I very much consider David Tennant from the newer stuff to be my Doctor. So when I very, very first watched this one, I was emotionally just wrecked afterwards. Because the build-up, it really did play into the hands of your emotions. Seeing the Doctor go off and seeing his companions and that kind of stuff, it was hard to watch at the time. If you were a hardcore Doctor Who Tennant fan, it was hard to watch. But on repeat viewings, that process has now kind of taken a different approach for me as I watch it. I still don't mind it, don't get me wrong, and I still get fairly emotional watching it, which I'm not ashamed of. But it doesn't quite have the same feeling for me, because I do feel like that whole portion of the end of time could have been used up, possibly giving us a bigger part of the story. They could have, filled some of that section with some more meaningful story and some other stuff. But yeah, so that's like the other thing that I'm not too fond of in this story. I don't mind it too much, but after I've watched it a few times now, it has changed my opinion on that side of things slightly. Moving on to what I do like about it, as much as it is emotional, and as much as David Tennant is quite down in the dumps and negative in this story, I do think the way he's played this story is very good. If you take away your thoughts about his regeneration and how you feel, how grumpy he is, and you have to remember that's more down to Russell T Davies than David Tennant. Russell T Davies wrote that script to be very much a goodbye story, and bringing his side of things, his era in Doctor Who. It's very much about him bringing all of that stuff full circle, and providing a very emotional goodbye to everybody. So you can't really fire some blame at David Tennant for that. All he's doing is, acting and doing the best with the script that he's been given. So that a lot of that is down to Russell T Davies. But the way that David Tennant plays that emotional part of his Doctor, and that foreboding and that, expectation that he knows he's going to pass on. Not going to die, but to pass on to somebody else. He's very, very well. There's a way that David Tennant plays that kind of emotional, on the verge of tears. Very deep. Especially that conversation he has with Wilf in the cafe. It's very, very well done, and the way that he talks to various people, like especially at the end when he's going off to get his reward, when he's talking to Wilf and Donna's mum, and then the other people. It's the way he does it is very, very good, and I like him throughout this entire this story. And from a pure fandom point of view, it does round off his era of Doctor Who, quite nicely. It bundles it up into a nice little parcel. There you go. That's the RTD and the David Tennant era. Almost contained in a way. And maybe that was detriment to the Matt Smith era, because one of the problems that I had overall with how Stephen Moffat wrote Doctor Who for when Matt Smith was the Doctor, for all of the 11th Doctor stuff, is very, very little in the way of looking back on Doctor Who. And I don't mean the classic years, because there were a few episodes where they did mention the classic Doctors. And even in the 11th hour, Matt Smith's first episode, there's that section where you see like a projection of all the previous Doctors, and then he walks through them. But Stephen Moffat never ever mentioned, and I could be wrong, so please let me know if I am wrong, but he never mentioned, or hardly ever mentioned, anything to do with the Russell T Davies era. Never referenced it, or referenced it very little. And like I say, please do let me know if I'm completely wrong on that and I've missed something cool. But I don't remember there being any big references to 9 or 10. Not that I know of anyway. And the only thing that we've got from that era is River Song. But even she doesn't mention anything about, not specifically David Tennant's Doctor or Chris Eccleston's Doctor. She mentions him being younger and the kind of things that she did before that point, but she doesn't reference those Doctors at all, and Stephen Moffat doesn't either. So maybe the way that Russell T Davies wrote that era up and contained it and signed it off, if you like, maybe that was detriment to Doctor Who going forward on from that, because I would have loved for Matt Smith to have referenced those Doctors, in his era. And I'm not really talking about the 50th anniversary, the Day of the Doctor, where David Tennant came back and all that stuff. So Stephen Moffat does kind of redeem himself with that, but you've still got those entire complete series where nothing's mentioned. But anyway, back to The End of Time. So I really like David Tennant and his acting in this. It's very, very good, if somewhat down in the dumps and a bit grumpy. Wilf, Bernard Cribbins, absolutely love him. I love the episodes where he's in Doctor Who. Really, really good. And he's, as usual, he's just fantastic in this. Really, really like him. I kind of like the idea of the Time Lords potentially coming back. I'm not really too hot on their kind of the way that was executed. It was a bit kind of mystical, magical kind of thing, how they came back. It was a bit far-fetched even for Doctor Who, but I like the concept of the Time Lords, potentially coming back, and because we've always, for the most part, we've always known that the Time Lords were a great race of people, and all that kind of stuff. But to see them come back with different intentions than We Come in Peace was a good concept, but just potentially poorly executed. And so I mean, overall, I honestly don't think it's the worst David Tennant story. I honestly don't think it's that bad. I think there are some problems with it, certainly, and I think there are some issues, but for me that is down to the writing, and that is down to Russell T Davies, which is no bad thing. I can see why he would want to write that series out and in his era out and that sort of thing. I can see why. That's the thing with this story and these 2 episodes. You can absolutely see why it was done the way it was. I think a lot of people that don't like it are just maybe, it's just something that they're not used to, because, like I said, all of the previous Doctor's regenerations and everything have always been quite low key and quite quick and no faff and, just get on with it. And and the story overall, I quite like it. If I'm going to go and if I'm in the mood to watch something from the Tennant era, it's not one of the first things that I reach for when I want to watch something. Certainly not. There are some of the best, in my opinion, in the newer Doctor Who. There are 3 or 4 episodes from the Tennant era, which in my opinion are some of the best from newer Doctor Who. So this one, The End of Time, I don't typically reach for it straight away. But, I have, like I said, I've seen it 3 or 4 times now, and on repeat viewings, it does get easier, and it is a bit more enjoyable once you've got past your initial kind of, what's kind of happening here, what's going on, I don't understand, because there are some questions raised within the story, and they don't really get explored that often or that well at all throughout the thing. Like with the Time Lords who are standing like the weeping angels, that's not really taken forward anymore, especially not in anything that Moffat has written. The whole thing about the crystal, being thrown by Rassilon and then found by the Master, that's a bit, we've not really seen that stuff in Doctor Who before. It's not really explained very well, and there's like some other bits and pieces which aren't too straightforward to you, especially on the first time you watch it. But yeah, and the ending is very emotional. And like I said, I can see why it was done that way, because so many people loved and still do love David Tennant as the Doctor. It was I think Russell T Davies saw it as saying goodbye to us, as well as his companions and stuff. So The End of Time, not the best Doctor Who story, but absolutely not the worst. And this probably the most touching moment for me wasn't the conversation with Wilfred in the cafe. It wasn't his conversation with the Master. It wasn't anything like that. The only emotional bit for me was this little snippet before his regeneration where he talks to Rose.
You alright, mate?
Yeah,
Too much to drink?
something like that.
Maybe it's time you went home.
Yeah.
Anyway, Happy New Year.
And you? What year is this?
Blimey, how much have you had? 2005, January the 1st.
2005. Tell you what, I bet you're gonna have a really great year.
Yeah? See ya.
So I really like that little conversation there. I'm not too fussed on the other companions that he goes off to see. It's a bit kind of, expected, but that conversation with Rose, because while I'm not a fan of Russell T Davies writing that whole era and containing it almost, I do feel it is fitting for Rose to have that nice little conversation, seeing as it started with Rose. So as well as the Doctor regenerating and stuff like that, you could argue that it's a bit. This story is very self-indulgent. Don't get me wrong. I do acknowledge that. I do realise that. But if there was one of those, if that whole stuff had been filmed and Russell T Davies was like, look, looking back on this is a bit kind of internal and a little bit self-indulgent. We need to chop some of this. Going and visiting companions and getting his reward. I think they should have kept that bit. This is like in theory, but I would have thought that they would have kept that little conversation with Rose, because although the comeback in 2005 didn't start with David Tennant, it started with Rose. So it is quite fitting that they round it out with her being the last person that he actually talks to before he regenerates. And so the end of time. I'm rambling now, aren't I? I've said that quite a few times, as if I'm going to close this section. I really am now. The end of time, it's not the greatest, but it certainly isn't the worst. That is going to wrap for episode 8. So that is a wrap, and we are done for episode 8. Thank you very, very much for joining me once again. Could you please, if you enjoy this podcast, would you do me a favour and just pop over to iTunes and leave a review? It really, really helps with subscribers and that kind of stuff. So if you don't subscribe to this show as yet, you can do. Just jump over to iTunes and do a search for Big Blue Box Podcast, and you will see it in there. If you could give that a subscribe, and then once you've listened to this or another couple, if you do like it, can you please pop a review on there, because that really helps me, and I will be your bestie, your Doctor Who bestie forever. Thank you very much. If you want to contact me, you can do so on Twitter. It's at Big Blue Box PCast. Or you can jump over to Facebook and have a conversation with me. It's facebook.com/Big Blue Box Podcast. It's been very, very cool talking through these things with Doctor Who. I hope you've enjoyed, and I will be back for episode 9. But until then, Alonzi!